So today we are looking at the concept of radical gratitude, which means choosing to live in a state of appreciation for the gifts and experiences in your life. And by that, I mean, and what the radical part means, is to be so attuned to be looking for small and large blessings that you're always jumping up and down. And whether that's figurative or literal, to allow our brains to capture all of these beautiful moments takes an effort because our brains are really designed to look for danger. That's how we survive. And in a world like this, we need to counterbalance that. So radical gratitude works. Annalie is an incredible leader. Her life's purpose is to optimize human potential. And having worked with her, I can tell you she does that in her kindness and her enormity of ideas. She's guided strategic change and business transformation and the design of innovative learning models and unique partnerships across 5 continents. She currently leads strategic partnerships at Sparks and Honey, which is a New York-based strategy consultancy that combines AI and machine learning with the best of human intelligence to make sense of global challenges, to smart thinkers and doers. So her bio could take up the rest of the morning. It's endlessly fascinating. But what really fascinates me about Annalie is your brilliance, your curiosity, and of course, your illustrious career. You've touched so many people. I want to know how you have learned to cope with disappointments and frustrations.
I think there is probably a first acknowledgement of gratitude, radical gratitude here for something that is probably unlikely that most people will consider a blessing. But in many ways, I think I learned resilience at a very, very young age. I didn't know when I was a little girl what alcoholism meant, but over time I experienced the volatility of living or being born into a household where my dad was sort of a binge drinker, and it wasn't a permanent state. It was just that he would on a regular basis fall off the wagon a little bit, and my mom didn't particularly cope very well with that. There wasn't something available like Alcoholics Anonymous in the early days, or maybe there was, we didn't know about it, but that kind of tumultuous scenario of being the firstborn child and then sometimes being finding yourself in a very volatile and unsafe and confusing circumstance just literally hyper grew my resilience, my adaptiveness, and my ability to solve problems on the go. So that's probably lesson number 1, where I learned how to deal with disappointment and then find a way to still hold myself together and also look out for my siblings and make the world safe for others. So that's probably a first life lesson. There were many, many others along the road. I guess one of the challenging experiences I had was not really knowing what I wanted to do when I first left university, and finding myself really like in a sort of a no man's land where others were really finding like, you know, their life purpose. They had it all mapped out and knew what they were going to do. And 5 years later, they're going to be this and that and the other. And I just didn't have that certainty, and that created quite a lot of sort of self-doubt. And I think that that's part of the problem with some of the narratives of this whole notion of goal orientation and being high achievers, etc., that you got to have it all figured out. And sometimes it takes a long time to figure things out. And sometimes it also means that you have to try things and sometimes fail at them to realize that, that's how we grow. So I'll just stop there if you want to ask any more questions.
Well, I really appreciate your sharing that, because I think a lot of people go through that. You know, if you're on a track to become a physician or something that requires a very specific kind of training, no matter how hard it is, you know what your next step is. I can really relate, and I believe that a lot of people here can relate, even if it's not in their primary career, but in their creative life. It's hard to feel good about yourself when you're not getting, external appreciation. And I'm always just so curious. So you grew up in a really rough situation, and eventually you became yourself, and you're full of life and you're positive, but morphing that, and I love that you mentioned failure, morphing that agony through what you learn in failure to finally get to the point of saying what did you finally say to yourself? I'm not going to think this or do that anymore. I'm worth it. Or how did that go for you?
I think there is a period of sort of self-doubt, and sometimes it can become wallowing, and sometimes it can become sort of really damaging if you stay in that place where you reinforce your negative thoughts all the time. I'll give you an example of a really rough patch, because it's like literally peaks and troughs, peaks and troughs. So when I eventually found my stride in South Africa, I ended up becoming very, very successful and a really extraordinary achiever. I did amazing things. And then I decided to move to Australia and didn't realize how exceptionally difficult that transition was going to be. So I moved to Australia in 1999 and couldn't find a job for 14 months. And that was after I had worked in a major international firm or company in South Africa and had held a fairly really good position. But I mean, when I moved to Sydney, headhunters and recruiters would say to me, like, Billiton who? Meanwhile, it was the sort of largest metal and mining company on the London Stock Exchange. And I was like, oh my God, like, is it because I'm South African? Is it because of what, it was still apartheid years? Anyway, long story short is I had to keep a file of all the rejection letters because there was Centrelink, which was like a sort of a social security system in Australia that would support you with childcare expenses whilst you were looking for a job. And you had to prove that you were looking for a job and that you haven't been successful. So I had this folder of 875 rejection
Oh
letters
my God.
because I worked very, very hard to land a job. And one day I decided that I'm going to create a bonfire and burn every single one of these rejection letters because it was just a reminder for me that I wasn't worthy.
Mm.
Another thing that happened, and I don't even know if the person who hired me eventually is actually on this call, but I applied for a position. And I bumped into a South African immigrant who I related the story to and said, I just don't know what to do to get cut through and I would consistently get, interviews, but come second or third. And he said to me, well, maybe you need to just change your approach. And I went, what do you mean? And he said, well, instead of trying to convince recruiters that you are as good as everybody else, even though you don't have Australian experience, why don't you dial up your point of difference? Why don't you say something like, I'm not Australian, I don't have Australian experience, but here is why you should hire me, because I came to this country on my own expense. I'm more committed than the average Joe to make a go of this and to be successful and to work hard. I didn't put it in that many words, but it was kind of like this notion of, the immigrant story, where most immigrants work super hard to overcome the sort of disadvantage that they have, and they're very committed and motivated to land on their feet. And it worked for me because that was the very next role that I actually got hired for. But what it taught me was that the importance of reframing the way that you look at a problem. And it was probably for me the start to a whole journey of understanding how our own narratives can get in our way.
Wow. Okay, first of all, what you just shared is exactly what I dream of sharing in this community. To take someone who is so successful, so powerful like you, to open up so vulnerably, I've never had, that many rejections compiled. Thank you for your vulnerability and your beauty and your strength. This is what helps people to see we're not alone with these struggles. So I'm going to put a pause right now, and I want to present the prompts.